The Talk Station presents Faith Matters, a look at contemporary stories and issues from a faith perspective. While this is a pre-recorded show, we are interested in your ideas, comments, and questions, and we urge you to email them to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life.
And now on the Talk Station, Faith Matters.
And welcome to the program. Good to have you with us here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Cornegie and Bishop Doc Loomis. And good day, gentlemen. Good to have the band back together.
It is. Good to be here.
At least in a trio.
If you're going to church today and you meet somebody who's sick, it's probably because they ran into Robert or I this week. We're recording early in the week for a Sunday broadcast, and we are both sick as dogs.
Yes. All right. Now that we have that
It's a
out of
public
the way.
service announcement. Stay away from us.
Yes. Yeah, I tried to get them to sit in another room, but they wouldn't do it. Let's take a look at one of their stories today, because the biggest movie opening is also has a little controversy to go with it, and that's the biggest movie opening in a long time is a Beauty and the Beast film. It's the retelling of the 1991 version, Disney version, done with live action, and instead of the cartoon characters, it has people running the show now, but also all the same songs, and I understand people singing along in the movie theater, and they've added on some new songs and new parts as well, too. But before the movie came out, there was a big play about the relationship of two male characters. And to take a look at from the stream, their article post the release of the movie says, "By sexualizing male friendship, Disney makes a mockery of the original tale." Well, I think you first have to say that every Disney telling of a story is not like the original. I don't think you can name one. Snow White, any of them aren't really like the original story. So I don't think you really even look at that. I don't think that's even a consideration. I don't know what you guys think. But,
well, they do. It seems to have gotten, and it says so in the article, that everything seems to be either politicized or sexualized or both nowadays. So that any story that you put out is going to have some kind of new twist to it, according to the popular culture fad at that time. And so that's what we're seeing written into this thing.
But a lot of 18th century fairy tales, for example, like this were not written for children. They were written for adults. And so
they began as political commentary.
Yes.
That's right.
I mean, this was written in 1740, the original Beauty and the Beast, and then it was updated politically in 1756. It only took 16 years, and they did it again. Remarkably, it's been, about 16 years since they've done this, right?
Yeah.
In 1991.
Or 91, okay.
But it was a morality play as well. I mean, it was this coming-of-age movie about a young woman and discovering, who she is. That's what it was. Well, now, of course, it's discovering she's a radical feminist. So
let's talk about a couple of these things. The article here in the stream by Michael Matheson Miller, the New York Times, Vanity Fair, Attitude magazine, and others have celebrated Disney's decision to modernize the new Beauty and the Beast film with a more feminist Belle and a first-ever exclusively gay character. That's in quotation marks. I believe that's quoting the director. It says Emma Watson wants the main character, Belle, not simply to be a reader of books, but an assertive feminist inventor who wears riding boots. The newly added character of LeFou, who is not new to the cartoon. He was new to the, not in the original fairy tale, but it was in the 91 Disney movie. For his part, struggles with his identity and same-sex attraction towards Gaston, the boorish frat boy who tries to woo Belle. So, again, the article goes on to talk about that it skips over the original importance of the original story. But again, it wasn't meant to. It was meant to be a live-action retelling of their 91 hit. I mean, that's what Hollywood does, is it recycles.
Right.
So it was not meant to change that. However, they did, from the folks I've talked to that have seen the movie, have said that they did certainly change Belle's character in it, gave her a different sort of assertiveness than she had in the original Disney movie of it. So let's talk about that part first. As he calls it here, bumper sticker feminism. Says artistic failure is the portrayal of Belle as an assertive feminist. And again, this, Robert, as you said, just kind of goes down the whole political line. This is where we are, and we're going to take characters and remake them in their image.
That's right. Well, it is the current meme. You know, it's the current position that to be a successful woman, this is the model that you have to follow, and so that's what we're seeing played out, coming out through this Disney machine that pumps these things out constantly now. You know, once they lost Walt, you know, and he was an authoritarian, and he knew exactly what he wanted to put out, and I'm not defending everything he put out. I'm just saying
but he wanted them changed to be family friendly.
Exactly right. This was to take you an escape from the politics and the sexualization, and it was to let the kids enjoy you know, the drama. I mean, you know, how many kids that watch this? I know when I saw it the first time, the character that I most identified with was
Belle.
The Beast.
Oh.
Belle. Now that may be your case, but in my case, it was the Beast. It wasn't Gaston or any of the others. It was the Beast. You know, because you're not sure. You know, you're. And that's what they didn't tamper too much with him, I don't think, in this one, but they did play around the edges. You know, they brought in these themes that seem to saturate our media now.
And Doc, as you were saying, the original was a much more of a political statement, and in fact, this article claims that it was much more affirming of women. The original story, the original fairy tale.
Well, the interesting thing about this is because this actually is based in historical fact, right? And so, you know, there was a family who worked their way up through their peerage by moving from country to country who were hairy people. There was a guy who was a beast, and he had hairy children, and that led to an international, really, but a European hunger for every court to have hairy children in it. No, I'm not kidding.
Really?
This is where this came from. And it was such a huge thing in Europe in the royal courts, from Russia to Germany to France to England, to have, and Spain, to have a hairy. They treated them basically like pets. Now I don't know why I'm telling you that, except that I know that, and that's the background of this thing. But what you're saying is true. What don't you want the historical background on the Beast?
Yeah, why not?
All right.
Yeah, so it's again, about the role of women.
Maybe that's why I identified so much with the Beast.
The hairy Beast.
Yeah.
Yes.
Because I've had this beard a long time.
But in the early story, the woman is seen as the one she's the protagonist in the movie, but she's the one that understands. She's the one that says, I can look beyond the way you're being treated, the way that you look. And that was what the original story was trying to get the Europeans to say, was, look, it's not skin deep, if you will, right?
Correct.
And then you have the characters of LeFou and Gaston, and the idea, you know, we're from a generation where you're used to having the handsome male and a foil. You know, that was pretty common. I think Andy Devine played that in every movie it was ever.
We're all looking at each other trying to figure out which one of us is handsome and which is the foil.
That was definitely the foil. That's not an uncommon formula. But in the last 10 years, 20 years or so, we are seeing that if two men are that good friends, there must be something else going on. I mean, that's the story.
They've done it to everything.
Well, they did it in the church, Robert. I mean,
I know.
Remember all the books that were written in the 70s, 80s about the feminization or the gayification of Christ? And it became very clear that because he had a special relationship with John, the disciple whom he loved, as John called himself, and that John was there at the end when everybody else left, and that John is pictured resting his head on his shoulder at the Last Supper in the Da Vinci painting, then surely he must have been, because there's no indication he was heterosexual, so he must have been gay.
Yeah, well, and David and Jonathan. And I mean, you know, they've re-patterned this whole thing. I mean, That's what eisegesis does. It reads in your worldview into
Right.
Revelation, and so this is a common thing. But what they've done, it's distorted that male friendship relationship, so that it actually kind of puts it out front.
And
this sexuality
I
thing.
think it's made it very difficult for men to have that kind of a buddy relationship.
Well, that's the warning of the article, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's a possible outcome, probable outcome of this. That little kids now, they had this little thing. Maybe I'm supposed to have this little thing with my little buddies running around out there. And look, I mean, there are we're not even going to get into the tendencies and all of that stuff, but to put it in this instrument, which is a children's story, is, I think, the major error. That there are other vehicles that you can use to do that, but to put it in a fairy tale is really despicable. Quite frankly,
it's the effort to make that all normal.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah, that's right.
That's the normalized relationship.
What I hate seeing is just the innocence lost.
Right.
Right now, to hang out with a young person of the same sex or the opposite sex, like working with youth like we do, I look at people and I see them looking at me, and I think I know what they're thinking.
Right.
Innocence lost.
More to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Welcome back to Faith Matters here on the talk station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Bishop Doc Loomis and Reverend Robert Cornegay. And our next article we want to talk about today comes from Religion Dispatches, RD. It's religiondispatches.org is the website, and the writer is Anna Little. And she writes, "The Unbearable Whiteness of American Lent." During one of the airless afternoons I spent in St. Rita's Sunday School, our teacher gave us the exercise of drawing the indulgences that we would give up for the upcoming Lenten season. Peering at the kids around me, all sketching out their favorite snacks and most beloved toys, I stared at my bright yellow construction paper at a total loss. When the time came to stand up and explain our choices, my paper was still blank, and I became increasingly nervous as all of my white classmates proudly promised to abstain from playing with their Nintendo 64 or, what is it, Tamagotchis?
Tamagotchis.
I don't even know what that is.
Tamagotchis.
Until Holy Week. After grilling me on the little joys I partook on any given day, the teacher decided that I would be giving up television for Lent. As the only child of a perpetually exhausted single working mom, our second-hand 24-inch Sony with its 5 channels was more de facto babysitter and playmate than any luxury. In any case, I didn't understand what that had to do with Jesus wandering in the desert. And, well, probably not. Probably nothing. I think that probably may be our first response.
Kind of missed the point.
Yeah, Doc, in this article, from that perspective, is there any hope that she gets this right, really? I think she starts at that perspective as a kid, or she.
Well, if somebody in her church taught her that Lenten fasting was about giving up television, then they misinformed her. The kind of fasting that Jesus talked about when he said, I'm going to go away, and when I do, they'll fast, that kind of fasting, that was the fasting that helps us to remember the pain and suffering Jesus went through in his passion. And the point of Lent leading up to the Passion and Easter is to feel some of the pain that Christ would feel in order to better understand and be one with him as he prayed in John 17. And the point is that this church, or this St. Rita's school, by conflating giving, a New Year's resolution with Lent, did her a disservice. Really, the article should have ended there, and she should have gone to the priest and said, wait a minute, what does this have to do with Jesus? And the priest would have said, well, actually nothing. Let me go talk to your teacher, and that would have been that. But she was left with this idea that somehow or another Lent was about giving up a toy or a television set.
But she also has injected race into it. as well. As she says, I realized then that I didn't really get Lent, or at least how white Catholics interpreted it. I would feel embarrassed for some time about my inability to think of the indulgences in my life, and it would be the first of many experiences that would highlight the race and class difference between me, between myself and my Catholic peers.
Which is lovely. I mean, that makes for really good black on white press. The only challenge with it is there's nothing in the Bible that supports that position. The Bible's position on fasting is the reason that we go hungry is because everybody can relate to hunger universally. White people get just as hungry as black people do. And so the idea that Jesus was trying to get across, and the idea that the early fathers in fasting, was that we could all participate in the suffering of Christ. It is simply, if she has an issue, she should have the issue with the church who taught her this, is all I'm trying to say. This is not about Christianity. This is not about fasting. This is just her turning a silly experience into a black on white article. I don't go for it. I don't like this kind of quote journalism.
Now, what about the idea, Robert, though, that if she did come from, I mean, she insinuates that she comes from a poor background, single mom, tough times, and there may have been some times when they went hungry, when they didn't have meals. I mean, it seems like if she had really, again, proper guidance, she could have talked about that relating to the pain of Jesus more so.
Yeah,
and been a lesson for others
that's
as well.
exactly right. You know, it really brought back a memory for me from when we were living in Africa, and we were in a village that was about a 50-50 Muslim Christian village of about maybe 1,000 people that lived out there. It was an agricultural setting, and they raised cattle, and so, you know, that was the setting, and we were there long enough that we got to go through the Ramadan part as well as the Easter part, and the fascination between the two, and how they corresponded in so many ways. There was that sense in Ramadan that you literally don't even swallow your spit. You know, nothing comes in through that way,
right?
And then in the evening they can have a meal and that kind of thing. And so then that influenced in Africa the way the Lent was progressed, because they were very attuned to. I mean, they didn't have much to begin with, any of them,
right?
But what they gave up were not indulgences, luxuries. They gave up necessities. I mean, they gave up meals. They gave up all kinds of stuff. And it was fascinating to go through. And that after that, I'll never forget it. We stayed over the night before Easter. And that evening, the Christians paraded through the village in these long lines, walking through and singing songs of glory to God and all of that. And then when the sun broke the horizon at daybreak, I mean, it was the most awesome experience of my life. And so one of them, and so now when you know this, as we build up to the Easter moment and that sunrise time and all of that, that's the model that I'm not getting none of what she said really, and that maybe because of my whiteness, I don't know, but these people really understood the meaning. These black people that I was with really understood the meaning of what Lenten sacrifice is all about. And it was so powerful. It was cumulative for them with that release of He is risen. You know, it was just wow.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this is just the political piece, and I hate that we have to drag religion through all this stuff. But I mean, you look at the end of the article, and basically what this nice lady says is, and I know I'm right about those bad Catholics. And you know how? Because during the Civil War, the bad Catholic bishops supported the Confederacy. So I must be right. Catholics have a long history of not liking black people. Well, I got news for her. The Southern Methodists supported the Confederacy, and the Southern Baptists, and the Anglicans, and everybody else below the Mason-Dixon line that was preaching was fairly supportive of the Confederacy, not just the Catholic bishops. So, I mean, there may be more to this story here, but I can't stand it when people say, well, you know, these people were horrible over this thing they did, and so I know they still hate me today. And then the end of the article, I think we just talked about this a few minutes ago during the break, where she says, the meaning of Lent changed for me from an exercise in limited self-denial to one of self-love. A change that might move me further away from the solemnity of the liturgy, but brings me a little closer to my spirit.
To my spirit.
To my spirit.
Yeah.
Lent, this line, the meaning of Lent changed for me, is a lie. The meaning of Lent did not change for her. She changed Lent to be what she wanted it to be for her because of her self-love. And that is antithetical to everything that Christ taught and everything that the gospel stands for.
Yeah, yeah.
Your experience in Africa may be mirrored, I think, by others who have seen the growth of the church, the Christian church in Africa and in the Southern Hemisphere, the majority world church, it's sometimes called. So, and a lot of it has to do with that they don't buy into what is, frankly, the view, Doc, that you're talking about, and even her view, has been conflated by a lot of people. A lot of people relate Lent to I'm going to give up watching Netflix
or Facebook, or
right,
something like that,
right?
Yeah.
And not a real sacrifice, anything that would actually hurt.
Yeah.
So
that's the beauty of it. She was the one kid in that school. Let's say she was the only young black girl in that school. Mm-hmm. She was the one kid that actually had the most to gain by giving something up, whatever it was, because she had the least.
Right.
Because that's the way Christ says it's into the world, right?
Right.
No
Right.
2 tunics, no purse, no staff.
Right.
And so it's in that context that Christians go forward, and it's from there that we're supposed to fast. Mm-hmm. So one would think that the article that she might write would be, how blessed I was for as little as I had, there was still something I could give up for my Savior.
Yeah, yeah.
That would be a different tack.
That's the true heart of the servant king, isn't it? That
suffering servant.
The suffering servant. Yes, exactly. That he recognized exactly what was going on, the temptations that his 40-day fast, in the wilderness, and how this is just a touchstone for us in our relationship with him, and identifying with that suffering servant willingly laying down our lives. And she missed that point completely. It became something else. Yeah. She was a victim. She pulled the victim card on that one.
But maybe the irony is that she did what many do, is reshape the gospel in their image.
Well, that's right.
And that's the battle. That's a battle we all face.
Well, yeah. And you hear people, what are you giving up for Lent? I mean, that's kind of like the popular mantra. Well,
right.
I don't know. I haven't thought about it. I'm going to give up Lent for Lent.
Yeah, right.
That's a doc.
Yeah.
So I just stole that.
I'm going to give up reading this nice lady's articles. Cancel my subscription to Ms. Magazine.
We'll have more to come in a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. Welcome back to Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And I'm Ben Ball, along with Bishop Doc Loomis and Reverend Robert Cornegy. And we talk about an article today that actually had its origins earlier this year, late last year, too, when we were talking about the transfer of a well-known cathedral from the Russian government to the Russian Orthodox Church. And this has now happened, but it didn't happen quietly. It had a protest. Now, the article that I sent out for y'all to read was from, first time I've ever done this, from the TASS news agency, the Russian news agency. Another article I saw said 4,000 people were there for the protest. This is 2,000, and it says, against St. Isaac's Cathedral, transferred to Orthodox Church in St. Petersburg. This is, Doc, I think you are familiar with this cathedral, or at least have read some more on it. That this is a glorious building. I mean, this is a huge building, and it has been the sort of like St. Peter's Square is in Russia. This is where everyone goes to, not for its religious significance so much, but just for the magnificence of the building. They go to see it.
Yeah, I've never been to St. Petersburg, but if I did, it'd probably be one of the first places I would go. It looks phenomenal. Mm-hmm. The artwork alone inside, it's all been redone, beautifully redone, and largely not through the tithes of the faithful, but through the city and their cultural, economic, and art communities have really worked hard to restore this. And while so after the Bolshevik Revolution, a lot of these properties were taken, just literally taken by the state, and this was, of course, one of them. And but there were laws passed within the last 20 years that suggested that these municipalities had to start giving back the property to the church. That was the genesis of this thing. But by the time those laws were passed, this place was already functioning as a museum of some note. I didn't know it was so popular, but they draw a lot of people. But there was
$3 million a year.
So, and there was a side chapel, if you will, a side chapel bigger than most of our churches, where services did continue to be held. But really, the people of the church had no administrative authority over the building. They didn't own the building. It was all the city. And it was kind of an afterthought. Well, we'll let them worship over there.
Right.
So when it came time to transfer it back to where the church would have the authority for the whole structure, there was a protest. And part of the reason for that is that there's a battle between Moscow and St. Petersburg, Moscow being the governmental head and the economic head of a nation, often comes at odds with the people of St. Petersburg, who like to think that they are the cultural and intellectual capital of a nation. Mm-hmm. And so when the government in Moscow hands an edict down that says you need to give this back, you need to take one of your cultural icons and give it back, then that brings up, literally dozens and hundreds of years of fighting between those two major cities. And so there's much more to this than just the transfer of a church. It's what's mirrored in it and what's reflected by it, I think.
Well, yeah, and I would agree with that St. Petersburg has become kind of the Russian element of the old. I mean, this is where the culture, the Russian culture of the old Soviet Union, which was, of course, incorporated so many more cultures, but in the new Federal Republic of Russia,
right?
It is this is kind of the Mecca, if you will, of Russian culture, and so now that it's moving from it's a little, for me it was a little confusing, and maybe you can straighten that out. It's still, I believe, going to have, it's open for tours.
Yes.
Although the church is going to be responsible, but I think the city still owns the actual property.
I think that may refer to the land.
The
city
land
owns
itself.
The land itself.
Okay, so the building becomes the property, back to the property of the church. And this was out of that collapse of the Soviet Union, the Glasnost, whatever.
Well, you
it was,
also have the reestablishment of the Russian Orthodox Church. I mean, basically, you remember that it was the opiate of the masses when the Bolshevik Revolution took place, and the churches were taken and closed.
Exactly.
And even this one, I think, went into disrepair for a long time until the people of St. Petersburg, again, noting their cultural stance.
Well, they renamed the city. Wasn't it renamed to Leningrad?
Yes, so originally it had been St. Petersburg, then Leningrad after the revolution.
And then it was renamed back to St. Petersburg. So that is a sort of tap back to the past as well. St. Peter, Petersburg. So, although I think it's Peter the Great, actually, that they're probably talking about. Yeah, not the Apostle Peter.
But but still, this is where the Christian church maintained a remnant during that time. I mean, during the time when they were
the Russian Orthodox Church. Yes. Right.
And Christians in general, and different. I mean, Russia is a huge country, and of course what they absorbed in the Soviet Union was even larger, much larger, and it's had various aspects of Christianity in different places there too. So there were always a remnant, but it became kind of like the samizdat, which was the underground bookstores. It became an underground church.
Right. Well, this is that, you brought it up, the separation between church and state, and how we have these issues. We talk about it over here, and they're kind of going through it over there as well, aren't they?
Well, Doc, I think what to me is fascinating here is that it is the secular side that is raising a protest over something being taken from them. We look at it in the reverse here, as we believe, or we often fight against not state takeover, but a cultural shift away from the church. They want to maintain that.
Right, and I think anybody that thinks that can't happen here is crazy. All you have to do is go to a college campus and look at what was originally a Presbyterian chapel or a Methodist chapel and see that it's now none of that anymore, that the diocese or the conference doesn't have anything to do with it really anymore, and it's been given over as just another academic facility. This is what happens in an age of tourist attraction.
Yes.
This is what happens in an age of enlightenment when a group like the folks in St. Petersburg begin to imagine that their intelligence has moved beyond any real need for God, and God becomes kind of a laughable, let's put him in the side room kind of thing. And then when you try and take that away and give it back to God, they freak out because they don't see God as really anything important at all.
Back in February, New York Times ran an article on this impending turnover and the protest against the local lawmakers who St. Petersburg's governor had decided the fate of one of the city symbols without any discussion, saying just bluntly that the issue has been resolved. Well, one of the protesters back then says, "I think there are enough churches already," says Natalia Belasova, one of the protesters, a retired engineer. "I love St.ISAAC's very much, but this is a monument first and a church second." Correct,
yeah. This has been actually nothing new in Europe. This is what Europe's been going through, and I would say St. Petersburg, the city itself, is more
European
right, to a degree than it is Asian, or
certainly close to the border with Norway and
correct.
Finland.
And so there's this. I mean, we would spend half the year in Africa, half the year in Europe, and the period that we were in Europe, the churches, the big cathedrals, were basically museums.
Right.
They would have a service, but they would on Sunday, but there would be maybe 15, 20 really old people in there who remember the old ways, and then we would go in, and they would just be thrilled to have this shipload of Christians, excuse me, from all over the world to come in. And then after the service was over, we'd go out the door, and there'd be all these long lines of tourists waiting to get in to tour the church. Right. And but and it's fascinating to me that in the vacuum, we talk about it, that Europe is post-Christian primarily. I mean, there's an underground thing that's going on, sort of.
A remnant, perhaps.
Yeah, a remnant. But the overall, it's post-Christian. And the consequence is that another religion is moving into, they thought secularism, human secularism, would be the religion that would dominate. And it did for a couple of generations. But now there's another religion that's coming in, and they're not quite as polite as those former religionists that they were used to.
And Europe has given up. They've given up the moral high ground that could be used to defend themselves against that.
That's exactly right.
Secularism cannot defend itself against what's coming to Europe.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think they're learning a bad lesson now.
Yeah, they've sow the wind, and you reap the whirlwind. And that's what we're seeing happen in Europe, and it's it's not that far away here if we're not diligent.
But it's no wonder then that we turn to those Southern Hemisphere Christian churches who are sending missionaries to Europe.
Oh, and here as
and
well.
Here too. Yeah.
That's the truth. Absolutely. That we are in need. We need our brothers, and these, they are carrying on. So, yeah, pray for Europe. pray for St. Petersburg. Pray for those believers that are there and trying to live their lives. It's a troubling time.
One of the concerns among the people there in St. Petersburg, and this is reflected in this old New York Times article, says in recent years the Orthodox Church has assumed an outsized role in Russia's political life and steadily increased its influence over worldly matters, from getting opera productions banned and censoring film scripts to turning a blind eye to radical Orthodox activists who smash what they see as anti-religious sculptures. Now, this is, again, coming from the New York Times writing about it, too, saying that the problem is that the Orthodox believers receive preferential treatment, said Galina Bova, a Russian language teacher who was at the protest. But what about non-believers or those who belong to other confessions?
Wow.
So,
what a nice segue into our final piece.
Yeah.
yes, well, that'll be coming up here in just a moment here on Faith Matters on the Talk Station, FM 107 and AM 1240. And we'll be back. I'm Ben Ball, along with Reverend Robert Cornigan and Bishop Doc Loomis. We'll have more, our final segment in just a moment. And welcome back to our final segment here on Faith Matters here for this week. I'm Ben Ball, along with the Reverend Robert Cornigan from Chapel by the Sea, and also retired Bishop Doc Loomis. And as we take a look at one more issue here today, and it's one that's going on as we are recording this on a Tuesday. The hearings are underway as we speak. And it's the Judiciary Committee hearings for Judge Neil Gorsuch. That's the nominee to replace Antonin Scalia on the Supreme Court. At least it's the Republican nominee. Of course, a lot of the hearing right now has been talking about how there was a nominee who never got a hearing, but that's another story. This article is from The Atlantic, and it's Gorsuch's Selective View of Religious Freedom, written by Garrett Epps. As the Judiciary Committee hearings for Judge Neil Gorsuch begin, I retain my impression that he is, in his way, a splendid fellow, intelligent and hardworking, and, as near as I can tell, devoid of the streak of jack-in-office meanness that mars the legacy of, that's what it says, right?
I know it.
Of his predecessor, Antonin Scalia. If he were a Southerner, he would have just said, bless his heart.
Yeah, that's right.
All right, Doc, pull it together here now.
I won't pray for him.
But I also wonder whether he has a blind spot in an area that should concern Americans' religious freedom. Consider his separate opinion in the 10th Circuit's opinion in Burwell versus Hobby Lobby stores, and then it goes into the Hobby Lobby coverage. And then he talks about they challenge the requirement of coverage of substantial burden on the free exercise of religion. And I'm trying to see if I can summarize what he said about it. But in any case, this is the idea. I think he said all these religious freedom measures erect strong legal protections for one and only one set of religious beliefs: opposition to LGBT rights and marriage equality. That's what this guy writes about Neil Gorsuch and his opinions. Again, this seems to be. I mean, he clerked for Anthony Kennedy. He has been a respected jurist for a number of years. I think this is as close to middle of the road to leaning conservative nominee that you're going to get out of a Republican administration. I think the Democrats could probably not do any better than Neil Gorsuch right now. Yeah. I mean, and I think he's going to get. I think he'll get approved, but. And the lines will be drawn from the next opening that will eventually come up. But Robert, what do you think about this idea of his concept of religious freedom having a problem?
Yeah, well, they're looking for anything. They're desperate. They know that they've been, that Trump has picked an honorable, highly regarded and capable man for this position, and they don't know what else to do. So this is one of their little sycophants who's written this article, who's trying to find something, if anything, to bring up an objection. And look, I mean, obviously this, there are two sides to this thing: the governmental side and the faith side, the church side, if you will, secular, sacred. And this guy is fully in the sacred camp. Excuse me, the secular camp. And his position is that the government has the authority over anything from a partisan religious position. And so naturally, this guy, Gorsuch, they've determined that he's going to lean towards the religious freedom side, which is, interestingly, for the last 250 years of the existence of this country, has been the normal side. But they really do believe that they are the new normal, that their position is the one that is to be the one that everybody has to conform to. And there is no tolerance. I mean, it's to the death. Every battle has become to the death. And it's just so sad to see these guys doing this, because they're doing it for the base. They're playing to the base. They're throwing red meat to their hardcore crowd, and it's beyond the pale what they're doing. This article, Atlantic should be ashamed of itself for publishing this thing. It is so biased.
Well, the facts aren't even right.
Right.
I mean, they're making it sound like what Gorsuch came down against was the pill.
Right.
And it wasn't. In the Hobby Lobby case, it was abortifacients.
Well, they conflated the two, didn't they?
Yeah,
Right.
I mean, when they say it's some contraceptive aid. No, what they ruled against was killing children in the womb.
Right.
Hello? That's just a little bit different than what you said, I think.
Yeah. And that abortifacient, that is literally a chemical that goes in and destroys the fetus.
Right, yes.
I mean, it's already been born.
It's not like, that's what I'm saying. It's not a condom that he had a problem with.
No, exactly.
And the other thing is, this is a circuit court. Look, circuit courts they're tied to precedent. Mm-hmm. Okay, when you come out of the Supreme Court, you kind of go back and you do constitutional law. You actually start working from the base of fact that is the Constitution, or the base of law. You're not held by precedent in the same way the circuit is. So what he did on the circuit court is not what he's going to do on the Supreme Court.
Well, it was fascinating. I was listening this morning on the radio. He was beginning his hearing, and that very question, because that's the one that's coming up, is this whole issue of where does precedent stand in here? And he was part of I think there were 12 judges who wrote a 80-page book on precedents concerning constitutional law, and talking about how that actually works in the Supreme Court. And you're absolutely right. They're to go back to that. Well,
he's considered an originalist.
Yeah, they were interviewing one of the guys that worked with him, and he said, "Well, I think of him more as a textualist rather than an originalist. Mm-hmm. That he's going to go by. He believes in the written word, and that words have meaning, and that it's not elastic, and it's not living. These are fixed concepts. And then if you want to change it, well, there's a mechanism for doing that, and that's called amendments. You have to go through amendments, not judicial activism. So yeah, I'm confident he's gonna be brought in. Yeah. But they're gonna fight tooth and nail all the way through it.
Well, and this writer again talks about how Gorsuch. He says Gorsuch, however, simply privileges one set of beliefs and wipes out the others, and that just is not what he has said. To your point, Doc, is that's just simply not in agreement with the things that he has written.
Well, you have to believe, if in that case, this guy's showing his hand. What he's saying is that the presupposition is that it's the responsibility of government to provide health care services in whatever means they are. And contraceptive is one of those things, that it's the government's responsibility to do this. And therefore, anything towards a religious freedom that would constrain that in any way is against the law. It's illegal, because it's the government that has decided, that has declared that this is a right. And it's all you know, you talk about precedent. They're trying to build on some kind of precedents, but there's none there to build on. There's nothing under that.
This writer, again, Epps, says, no one can be against the concept of religious freedom. No one questions either that the concept extends beyond purely religious matters into economic and public life. But mapping that extension takes careful thought, and wherever lines are drawn, some people will feel they have lost.
Okay.
Well,
exactly.
Yes.
He gets money for stating the obvious.
Yeah, what an ability that guy
This is
has.
so sad, because this is simply a court standing up in favor of me living my life the way that my religion tells me I should, without harming others. Mm-hmm. You know, this is my religious conscience. This has been around forever. This is kind of how we were founded. And this business of throwing in lines, like how many times did he write in the article? 3 times? That protections, he's ruling in favor of protections for one and only one set of religious beliefs, opposition to LGBT rights and marriage equality. That is not the set of religious beliefs.
No.
Opposition to LGBT rights? Where's that in the Hobby Lobby ruling? I'm at a loss.
No. And
marriage equality, where's that in the Hobby Lobby ruling?
No, he's making the assumption, well, if he rules against that, he must be against anything else that we are against, that we are for. So, and that's not going to be the case. I think he's going to be extremely fair.
Yeah, he will be. And this, to me, is, you know, we call it's the new term, you know, clickbait. It's putting in an article all the little hot points that, you know, the narrow-minded hardcore crowd wants to hear. And that's what this guy is doing. And so this is how you build your portfolio, I assume, in writing these kinds of articles, is that you state these extreme positions. And he's gone way around the twist on this one. You know, to claim that this is an excuse for not voting for Gorsuch for the Supreme Court is just it's madness.
It is a subject that is going to be undertaken for the next couple of weeks at least, probably in there. Although the committee chair says he wants to have a vote out of committee by April 3rd, I kind of have doubts that that'll get to that point. But we'll see, and we'll join you next week on Faith Matters. Doc, Robert, I'll see you next time.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for Faith Matters. Email your comments, questions, and suggestions to faithmatters@thetalkstation.com.
Give me faith, trust what you say, that you're good and your love is great. I'm broken inside, I give you my life. Give me faith.
Faith Matters is a production of The Talk Station.